staff at ME. The project also involved my colleagues from GNS Science, Otago University, resilient organisations, and from EM Consulting. So broadly speaking, our project is concerned with helping to bring together disparate information and helping to map out the complex connections between freshwater systems, economic systems, and well-being. The idea was that the tool or processes we develop will be of some assistance to communities and decision makers tasked with thinking about these issues. Now, considering how broad and multi-dimensional is the concept of well-being, we made a decision early on that we would only concentrate specifically on economic and public health aspects of well-being, and only in terms of the principal connections between these well-beings and freshwater systems. In developing our online platform, which I'll present shortly, the Hawke's Bay was at the centre of our thinking. And it is really the extremes in freshwater systems and the more frequent incidences of these extremes associated with climate change that are really critical. We asked ourselves, should we just concentrate on one set of extremes, so like excess or high water and flooding, or maybe we should concentrate on low water and droughts? But I think because the experience of both types of extremes is such an important part of the future climate change story, particularly for the Hawke's Bay, we weren't able to focus on just one or the other. We decided we had to cover both. So also in terms of context, well, it seems to be the situation that problems are getting more and more complex. The phrase wicked problems, we've heard that for a long time now. What is also becoming more evident is that human decisions and actions in response to impending environmental stresses and hazards, such as low and high water flows, are themselves increasingly a source of risk. So we've seen this enlarging concept of risk that includes human actions as part of the risk landscape too. We may even have one of the authors of that Simpson paper, which the diagram is informed by on the right in the audience today. So when we say that humans are impacting risk, we don't just mean because there's a bunch of unintended consequences of our actions, but also because there are competing objectives, and also because when people decide to do something to address a problem, that's inevitably going to involve some trade-offs and maybe some transfer or transmission of risks. I mean, if we think about the COVID experience, for most of us, the main impacts were not related to health and our inability to access healthcare, but the impacts of the decisions that were put in place to avoid these outcomes. In the environmental change and sustainability literature, it is really commonplace to see the concept of a socio-ecological system taking centre place. A socio-ecological system is a system that includes society or humans and the ecological or biophysical subsystems and mutual interaction. One thing that is interesting about human systems, and therefore is also relevant to the socio-ecological system concept, is that human systems are reflexive systems. And what I mean by that is humans are constantly observing the evolution of the world and the systems in which they act, and are making decisions to try and steer their future. At least at the local central government level, the idea of well-being has become quite important in informing us around how we evaluate the performance of our systems and how we judge where we might go, where we are steering towards. So hence we've included a well-being lens in our online platform. We also hypothesize that continuing to develop system thinking or systems competence is critical in the complex world and complex problems we face. So causal loop diagrams and other graphical approaches such as Bayesian networks have promise in that they sort of sit across knowledge domains and disciplines, and they can help bring together causal relationships that might otherwise be considered separately. So against all this context, we asked ourselves, can we develop some kind of tool that could assist with conversations around climate change, freshwater systems, and well-being that was clearly based on a systems perspective? Can we ensure that the tool or platform promotes consideration of the connections and feedbacks between the problems that our communities face, and also the potential connections and feedbacks between solutions and between solutions and problems? And we recognize that this is only a small project. There's a host of other valuable information out there and models and data. And that's going to continue to be produced. So it's useful to think of the systems use kind of like this overarching framework, and then see how these other resources might connect into it. And then, well, traditionally, the form of disseminating our work and findings from a project like this might have been a technical report. But more and more, we see other forms of dissemination. Obviously, social media is an example. But like I often find this is just sort of quick bites or summaries, and with the ultimate underlying source still a report. So could we create something that was more of an online resource, albeit subject to the fact that the people in our project team weren't, software developers or web content producers? We've seen, for example, with GIS-based information, this concept of story maps being used, where you transfer various data into content that's more interactive and engaging for stakeholders. Could we do something kind of similar, but rather than it sort of being based around space and maps, could it be more based around the systems and thinking about linkages and connections and maybe changes over time? So we've created this online systems mapping platform. I think hopefully everyone's already got a link to that, but we can put it in the chat, definitely. Yeah, and for the sake of my stress levels and for the comfort of you watching, I'm not going to try and switch between the presentation and the online platform, because that would, yeah, I think just be too difficult. So what I've done is just put screenshots of the online platform here, and I'm going to talk to those. But feel free to flick through the online platform in your own time. So when you go into the link, the homepage or landing page is what you see. It's sort of just a bit of a background information. And then you click on this Let's Go button to go in further. Oops, sorry, I've got a bit of hay fever. Yeah, so, and then you get a bit more information and this row of tabs at the top. So we have, in addition to this page, a page on system dynamics, a section on the system diagram or system map, as we've renamed it, and then this larger piece of the platform, which is called Explore the System. So I'm going to show you the overarching system map shortly, but before I do, I'll just talk through some of the background information on system dynamics. So what's system dynamics? Well, basically it's a computer-aided approach to the analysis of systems, often with the view of policy analysis and system design. It's definitely not a new field. The father of system dynamics, I think, was the first person to produce a graphical output from a computer. So if that gives you some indication. It has a set of conventions around how we represent systems, which are quite useful and have proven to be quite enduring. So over on the left, we have one of the foundational tools in system dynamics, which is this causal loop diagram. Basically, these diagrams, they aid in visualizing how different components in a system are causally connected, with the idea that you can uncover and represent feedback structures. So it consists just of a set of words and arrows. The words are the variables or factors or components of the system, and the arrows show how these are causally connected. So in our diagram, for example, algae blooms has an effect on ecosystem health, and ecosystem health in turn has an effect on plant and animal growth, and so forth. And these plus and minus signs, they can be a little bit confusing. Basically, a positive sign means the two variables at either end of the arrow change in the same direction. So if ecosystem health goes up, we would expect plant and animal health to go plant and animal growth to go up as well. And conversely, if algae blooms increase, ecosystem health will decrease. When you see loops in the diagram, we have a feedback structure, and there are two forms of feedback: a reinforcing feedback or a balancing feedback. A reinforcing feedback is sometimes called a positive feedback, and that can be a bit misleading because they're not always positive in the sense that they're good. Basically, these reinforcing feedbacks indicate something like a snowball or a spiral effect. Once something changes, it just continues to change in the same way. On the other hand, when you have this balancing feedback, which can also be called a negative or a self-regulating feedback, when there's a change in the system that causes one component to change, it will flow through, and eventually that same component will change back towards in the direction it originally came from. So it's this sort of like self-regulation or balancing effect. Then if you want to move from sort of conceptual diagram to a model that you might build and run and simulate over time, we need to convert at least some of the system variables into stocks and flows. So I've got this simple stock and flow representation here in the middle of the freshwater system. It's like a bathtub model. The stocks are the accumulation of water, for example, the water in the bathtub, and the flows are what's adding or subtracting from the stock. So like the water flowing in through the through the tap or flowing out through the plug. So in our online platform, we have included some stocks and flows in the model. It doesn't simulate over time, but the reason we needed to do this, well, first of all, it was quite intuitive, especially for things like the freshwater system, to think of the system as stocks and flows. It's quite natural to think that way. It also had to do with the software that we used for creating the online platform. One downside, a little downside, is that it can be a little more effort to identify feedback loops when you include stocks and flows, because we kind of seem to think you might look at it and think the arrow of the flow is like the arrow in a causal loop diagram, but the flow is indicating a different thing. It's indicating whether something's going in and out of a stock, not the direction of causation. So, for example, that diagram at the top right would transfer into this one down the bottom if it was a causal loop diagram. So going back to our online platform, when you click on system map, you see this quite complex and spaghetti looking diagram of the overall system. So we have the hydrological system, obviously, because we're talking about freshwater. And then to get through to the economic and public health aspects of well-being, we needed to also include subsystems on the economy, nutrient cycling and contaminants, and public health and water qualities. So you can click on these magnifying glasses, and then you'll get this zoomed in view. For example, here, this is the economic system. We thought quite carefully about what we would call this, and not a diagram, we've called it a systems map. The reason is that when we call something a diagram, if we called it a diagram, I think it might cause a bit of panic or discomfort, because we feel that when we look at a diagram, we sort of have to understand it in its entirety. But the idea of a map is a little bit different. With a map, we feel more comfortable with complexity, perhaps only interrogating bits and pieces as relevant to our problem at a time. So the system map was constructed as a group model building exercise. We had a group of domain experts from the spheres of risk and disaster risk reduction, ecological economics, public health, hydrology, and groundwater modelling. We started by identifying key processes and outcomes that we wanted to include. A model was drafted, and then in a series of subject domain workshops, the model was refined. Now, if we go back to the platform and this Explore the System tab, there are two principal ways to interrogate the system further. The first is looking at the individual subsystems, so these on the left, while the other is going through the key themes or lenses or topic areas, so that's what's here on the right. So yeah, let's just start with looking at the hydrological system. So imagine I'm clicking on this button. So yeah, when you click on that, start with, you get this overall picture of the hydrological subsystem. This is just so you have an idea of where we're going. Then you click through at the bottom, so you go through a series of views, which builds up a story of the system. So I'm just going to pretend we're doing that. So yeah, water enters the local hydrological system via precipitation, which can then add to soil moisture or add to the stock of surface water, which is like lakes, streams, etc. As the amount of soil moisture increases, the proportion that becomes runoff increases. So this is like a form of self-regulation that prevents soil moisture increasing indefinitely. Over time, soil moisture also filters through to groundwater. The more soil moisture, the greater the infiltration flux. And the groundwater and surface water stocks are also connected. Groundwater is recharged by surface water. The greater the surface water, the greater we expect this recharge. Conversely, the more groundwater, the greater we expect water to enter back into surface water at locations of gaining surface water. Together, these processes form a sort of dynamic equilibrium between the surface water and groundwater stocks. And we've also included in this view a button where you can click on and be taken some extra information around the freshwater system produced by hydrological models. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this later. There's also these self-regulation processes happening with surface water, and that the more surface water there is, the greater becomes stream depths. And when you have deeper water, water flows faster, so more quickly water is lost from the system. Pretty much, it's flown to the oceans. There is also storage of surface water at various places around the catchment, and as these fill up, ponding reduces, and again, water flows more quickly out of the catchment. Of course, humans and human decisions are also critical in the hydrological system. Water is abstracted from both surface and groundwater stocks, some of which is allocated to economic production activities. The more economic production there is, and the more water is used, the more demand there is to keep abstracting water. And the extent or level of economic production, it's not the only factor affecting water demand. It also depends on how much water is required per unit of production, or the water intensity of production, so to speak. And then there are also decisions that might restrict how much water can be taken. The greater the perceptions of risk there are to water bodies, the more we can expect limits on abstraction. And perceptions of risk can be influenced by monitoring of water bodies themselves. So basically the amount of water there is. And so we've got these links in this diagram drawn from both surface water and groundwater stocks to risk perceptions, although at the moment most of our monitoring tends to be just of surface water bodies. Okay, so just going back to explore the system view, I'm just going to quickly flip through the nutrient cycling and contaminants subsystem. So nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus, they're essential parts of ecosystems. They're part of the building blocks of life, so to speak. And the ecosystems tend to operate within bounds. Both not enough and too much nutrients are detrimental for ecosystem health. And nutrients are contained in freshwater primarily in dissolved inorganic and also organic forms. And there are fluxes between the freshwater stocks associated with movement of water. There are these self-regulating processes in ecosystems that help to keep nutrients at appropriate levels. Basically, plants and then animals take up nutrients, and when they die, this matter settles down through the water column. Some becomes buried in sediments, which is removing nutrients from freshwater. The plant and animal matter, which contains the absorbed nutrients, also decays, and the microorganisms responsible for the decomposition produce a range of chemicals, including various nitrogen gases, which are emitted to the atmosphere. So again, this is removing nutrients from the water column, all assisted by healthy ecosystems. But we have situations where very high nutrients are discharged to freshwater bodies. This is usually associated with industrial, municipal, and agricultural waste and runoff. It can overwhelm the self-regulating processes, and we can have these situations of rapid growth in algae and cyanobacteria, known as algae blooms. And then the algae blooms can take oxygen and light needed for other biota, ultimately degrading ecosystem health and the ability to undertake these self-regulation processes longer term. And I think the important thing for public health is that algal blooms are also associated with the release of harmful toxins. And there are some important connections with the nutrients and contaminant subsystem and hydrology. For one, high water temperatures tend to be associated with increased plant and animal growth, and also likelihood of algal blooms. And water temperatures are influenced by the water depth and flow rate. And another thing is that flow rate also impacts on sediment burial fluxes, so this rate of nutrient cycling and removal. So going back to exploring the system, I'm not going to go through the economic system because it's quite large and would take too long, but let's just quickly run through the public health and water quality component. Yeah, so we've touched on this already, but a major pathway for contaminants to enter freshwater tends to be in waste and residuals from human activities. These are both discharged directly, and also there is this process mentioned before where we have excess nutrients associated with algal blooms and toxins being produced. And then humans come into contact with contaminants through drinking water or eating food prepared with contaminated water, and hygiene activities, or in recreation. All of these can lead to increased incidences of enteric disease and perhaps toxic poisoning. Increasingly, certain cancers are also being linked to environmental conditions. And a good example here is bowel cancers, which have been linked to the concentration of nitrogen in water. And another important thing about our big system is that the extent of excess overland flows or inundation, maybe called flooding events, is also really important for water quality and public health. So when we have water flowing in new ways and in new directions, there are increased pathways for waste to enter freshwater. As I understand, this is actually what happened in the Campylobacter outbreak in Havelock North. With a heavy rainfall event, sheep excrement was able to flow into a nearby wellhead. Another thing is that during significant rainfall events, we may find that wastewater treatment facilities become overwhelmed, possibly damaged, and similar things can happen for water treatment. So these are all connections between hydrology and public health. Okay, so going back to this exploring the system view, as I mentioned earlier, we have this set of themes we can also explore. We won't have time to go through all the details today, so I'm just going to tell you quickly what they contain. The climate change theme talks through potential changes in precipitation and the flow-on effects through hydrological stocks, and how climate change might impact on ambient temperature with implications for algae blooms. The flood and droughts theme goes through high water volumes and low water volumes as hazard events that impact on economic systems, and uses terms and concepts from disaster and risk science such as vulnerability, exposure, and coping capacity. The Wellbeing theme identifies some wellbeing dimensions or metrics that are influenced by all of the causal relationships going on in the rest of the system. So I've already talked a little bit about the incidences of disease, which can be thought of as wellbeing indicators for public health. In the economic area of the model, we have, or system map, we have consumption, wealth, household income. And then, you can tie these again to further health dimensions of well-being, such as nutrition, stress, and cardio disease. So this is just quickly showing you the themes views for freshwater system interventions. So again, it has text, it has some pictures of the components of the system. It also has these eye or information buttons, which you can click on and get further snippets of information. So this theme talks through some of the traditional interventions in freshwater systems around channel straightening and deepening, which essentially around having to move water out of the system quickly during high rainfall events. It talks through some of the flow on, it's a bit of a pun, implications of this, including possibly leading to less groundwater recharge. And And it also talks briefly about an example of another intervention being wetlands and some of the helpful system modifications. It's in this one here that wetlands might bring. So this online platform is intended to be more than just a system map and describing that map. As I mentioned at the start of my presentation, we also wanted to think about how the platform could bring together other information and data that is all relevant to our system and the problems being considered. So in our project, we looked at generating some discrete additional models and data and then linking this together with the system map. For one, we wanted to look at some aspects of public health, and we had members of our team with expertise in this area. So if we go back to the system diagram, there are a range of factors or causal conditions that influence the occurrence of enteric disease, some of which ultimately have a causal relationship back to precipitation, and which, as we know, will be impacted by climate change. So our public health researchers decided to investigate, using available data, the relationship between precipitation and the reporting of Campylobacter disease. Various statistical models were tested, and in the end, I think because diseases may take some time to materialize and be reported, and also inundation and flooding events depend on the accumulation of rain over time, they looked at the accumulated volumes of rainfall over 30 days as their variable. They also separated rainfall into quintile bands. And so we have in the platform links to these interactive maps. What was found is that in the high rainfall bands, quintile 4 and quintile 5, there was increased risk of Campylobacter infection for Hawke's Bay, Manawatu, Waikato, and Canterbury. So why Q4, Q5, quintile 4, quintile 5? Well, I think that probably relates to some sort of threshold effect where water needs to be, or rainfall needs to be over a certain threshold before some of those causal relationships play out that were shown in the model. Why different results for different regions? Well, if you go back to our system diagram, we're looking at relationships between precipitation and disease again, but there's lots of other variables at play, and the strength of the relationships will differ. Different places have different freshwater systems, and so there's going to be different extents to which we see these inundation or flow of water in different directions, which means there's different implications for the extent to which the pathways for waste entering freshwater systems occurs. On top of all of this, there's different wastewater treatment happening, different ways that it occurs at different places. Some locations may have multiple lines of defence, some might not, some may be more robust than others. Same goes for water treatment facilities. And on top of all this, obviously, there's different extents to which waste and residuals are produced in the first place, which are the ultimate source of the Campylobacter, which causes the enteric disease. Okay, and just carrying on, another set of additional modelling and data we have connected up to the platform is the outputs of groundwater modelling for Hera Tonga. So this helps to provide some concrete examples of what might happen to groundwater and surface water under different climate futures involving different patterns of precipitation. So I understand the hydrological models were set up for base conditions and then the rate of stream flows and groundwater levels or pressure were mapped. And then two alternative scenarios, so I just quickly flick through these maps, which we call the wet and dry, were modelled by looking at historical conditions of when there were dry spells and wet spells, and then putting those conditions through the model. And then again, stream flows and groundwater levels were mapped. And we can see, for example, the much lower stream flows under the dry scenario, particularly for the Naru Oro, and I think this one's the Tukituki River. Yes, so if we think about our system map, it can help in providing some context to these hydrological results. We might, for example, ask, since human abstraction has quite an important impact on stream flows and possibly groundwater, how was human abstraction included in the modelling? Yeah, so those kinds of questions. Basically, in the context of the system map, we can encourage knowledge and understanding of the model scope and its potential limitations. So given all the complexity depicted in the system diagram, I think it's easy to envisage that there may be quite a great variety of different things that may play out over time and space, and a diversity of outcomes that might occur. It can be, though, quite difficult to envisage what this diversity and outcomes might look like. So Bayesian networks are another system-oriented tool. In fact, you could call them a graphical method, just the same as causal loop diagrams and stock flow diagrams. And Bayesian networks have been used for a variety of purposes, including building up knowledge through expert opinion. We've also connected up a small Bayesian network of components of the hydrological system into our platform. It's largely a demonstration case at the moment. And looking at this example, we can see how these dry, wet, and base scenarios that I mentioned previously can be related back to the IPCC's standard climate scenarios, with probabilities of these dry, wet, base conditions playing out differently under the different IPCC scenarios. And under these different dry, wet, base conditions, there are different probabilities of outcomes in the hydrological system, such as under the wet condition, we have much higher probability of high stream flow, but non-negligible probability also of medium stream flows. So I think hopefully, as you can see, this is a type of model or tool that is useful as another viewpoint on the system. Such applications can help in envisaging the diversity of outcomes that may occur, and they provide tangible descriptions of uncertainties, or might use the word risks, in outcomes. So that's as far as I'm going to go in terms of demonstrating the platform. I will talk a little now about possible future extensions. Yeah, so obviously we've not covered all aspects of our complex world, and there's certainly room for extensions to the system map. We haven't, for example, considered the carbon cycle and greenhouse gas emissions in any way. And yeah, while we've described the importance of public health and economic outcomes in shaping risk perceptions around freshwater, and that in turn influences how people manage freshwater, there are obviously other dimensions affecting this decision making. For one, our understanding of the health of freshwater ecosystems themselves is an important contribution to decisions around managing water. As I understand, this is part of the mana o te wai concept. And then related to all of this, there are more well-being indicators that could be added, including ones around the environment, for example. We need to think more about how we connect in additional data and models, if that's desired. I think we've sort of just created like a proof of concept, a prototype, a demonstration so far. If we wanted to connect in a whole host of additional data, how do we make that fluid and user-friendly? I think I sort of alluded to this earlier, but we didn't not budget for a particular expertise in software and online development, so have relied on a method of implementation that is within the realm of the expertise of the people in our team. We've used a package called Stellar Architect, but yeah, obviously there's other options that could be explored. And I think another really important thing to think about is the potential to look further than researchers in the process of group model building and system mapping. I suppose you could say that create a more authentically transdisciplinary process that gathers knowledge from all sorts of different spheres, not just the research academic sphere. The process of mapping out systems has a lot of value in and of itself. A lot of knowledge is exchanged in the process. I've seen a few of these group model building processes involving wider members. And also from what I understand elsewhere, the process itself tends to be quite a positive experience. Okay, and then potential applications. So just to finish and recap, where might we go with this platform? Such as the one that as has been demonstrated today. Well, it's, overall a platform for creating a shared understanding of complex systems, particularly when it comes out of a collaborative group modeling session, as I just described. There's also potential as an education and communication tool. The system dynamics, and I think also Bayesian network approaches are relatively easy to pick up and can be quite effective in collating and passing knowledge. I understand that system dynamics is used quite a bit in parts of the US education system. We could look for opportunities here too. I think the platform we've created is also relatively flexible so that different stakeholders can use it as appropriate to their needs. Like, for example, when we put together community groups to deliberate on issues, so like a water management forum put in place by a regional council, as example, we often start with a process of bringing people up to speed. Kind of sort of often involves things like setting background reading, homework tasks, so to speak. And I think something like this is an alternative type of education and communication tool that could be employed. Among our team, we've also talked about the utility of the system map in the scoping and design stage of model building, because it provides a framework for discussions around what we want to include, what we can include, what we can't include, what we would really love to include, but is beyond the ability to implement or beyond the budget. And then, once it at the other end, in terms of models being produced, it's also a framework for making clear what the limitations might be in terms of our models and the results that are produced. What's not considered. And lastly, I think there is potential for a platform such as this to help focus in on where we need to direct our efforts more in the future. We can think about what data and work streams are covering aspects of the system well and where there are important gaps. So yeah, these are just some ideas. Very keen to hear other thoughts in the questions and comment section coming soon. And I thought I would just finish with this quote from Donella Meadows, who was quite a popular commentator on systems thinking.
Thank you, Nikki. I have a first question and one process. If people can do the raise hand function if they are one of the research teams, I will then promote you over to panelist status. While that's happening, are there any plans currently, Nikki and Christina, for this to be further developed, or that's a bit of an unfair question on the week of it being finished? But I suppose, what next ideally?
I can say a few things and maybe Christina can add to them. But yeah, I mean, yeah, the work is just finished. So yeah. But we did, as a final step in our project, look at where we might go with this kind of platform. So yeah, there's a few ideas. Most of them are what I talked through in the last slide. So we don't have anything concrete at the moment, but yeah, looking for opportunities.
So I'm going to, I think, I'm not, maybe Shannon is happy to be sitting there in the background. I'm not sure if it is working. You can send me a message otherwise, Shannon. If anyone has questions, please put up their hands, and I'll there's an allow to talk function. Yeah. Cool. So, great. We've got a question from the panel, I think. Is that what's happening? Yeah. Cool. Great.
Sorry, and I have an impossible name, Smriti.
Cool.
Thank you, Nikki. That was a really good presentation. And thanks, Christina. Both of you did a really great job, I guess, just steering the whole project team through this. I sort of have the obvious question of asking whether you had been able to present this back to the original stakeholders back in Hawke's Bay and what the reception was, whether they had any ideas for where they thought this might be most useful for them in going forward for their decision making. So really an area that's had a lot of change recently. Thank you.
Yeah, as I understand, a few of them are watching today. And yeah, we've sent some messages. We're keen to follow up as well with any further work as well. And yeah, we've been in contact in those regards.
Cool. We've got Shannon jumping in now. There was a question which you I think have touched on a little bit, but about the intended audience for the platform.
Yeah, I don't want to answer every question. Does anyone else? Or otherwise I will. Okay. Yeah, so we had lots of conversations around this, and because it was quite a general tool, we ended up with quite a few different audiences. Yeah, like as I mentioned, there was the education audience. I think that's pretty important. There's the policy development audience. I think they're probably the two main ones. And then also the one around, I think it's a really useful tool in terms of model scoping and talking about what's in models, what's out of models. So I see that as sort of three key ones, but if other people want to jump in and add more.
It's passed to you.
Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, and thanks for the presentation, Nikki. It was fantastic. Yeah, I think the other thing is potentially just for us as researchers, it's really nice to be able to see those big pictures and then to be able to bury into little parts as well to explore further. So that would be the other use case I could think of.
Yeah, one of our researchers said, I'm going to put a picture of this on my wall to remind me every time what I'm doing. So yeah, we've had those kind of comments.
Well, I can keep on asking my own questions, but Christina, did you have anything you'd just like to add now that you're in the spotlight?
No, nothing to add other than to thank Nikki. Nikki pulled the platform together and did all the hard work at the end, so really grateful for that.
Yeah, so one of the things that struck me was that you were working without any specific IT expertise in the team, so that is very impressive. With that in mind, for I guess a research project that was looking at undertaking something similar, how resource intensive was this project? How replicable is it?
Yeah, so I mean, we knew there was, because like myself and I think maybe at least another person in our team had used System Dynamics before, and the packages available are very user friendly. It's an easy, it's not like learning MATLAB or something. I think it's quite intuitive as a way of representing information. So I don't think the learning curve's too steep. And you can easily use so what we used was this existing infrastructure in the Stellar Architect software to put things online and share them. So yeah, if you want to do something very similar, I don't think it's too bad. The only thing is that it requires a license for the software, which is quite expensive. I won't quote how much it is because I'll probably get it wrong, but it's in the order of thousands of dollars.
If someone was wanting to do that sort of application, are you available to speak to them if someone's in the audience? Yeah, is that kind of something you envision in terms of the future life, that people can get in touch and you can talk to them about how it might work? I can also see another question coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Very keen to hear about other applications. Yeah, there's one PhD student I know of at the moment, sort of like we're involved with as well, myself and other people at ME. And yeah, I think sort of that kind of work has sort of added to this idea about it, because I don't think it's that popular at the moment. I mean, there's some pockets of people doing this kind of work, but it's not that well used. It could be used more. So yeah, keen to hear of other options, possibilities, ways we could go.
Sam, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, kia ora. Hi. That point about popularity is really interesting, Nikki. It's something that we've seen elsewhere in the Deep South, and I think a few of the other national science challenges as well have various research programs going on that they're looking at quite niche areas. There's been discussion today and a couple of questions about intended audience and various applications for tools like this and the work you've done. But I was wondering what your personal hopes are for it. Like, what will you consider to be success flowing on from this?
That's a tough question. Yeah, I would like to aid to the idea of that complex, I think sometimes we think complex problems can have simple solutions, but they don't. It would be nice if they did, but often they don't. So if we can build up a way of thinking about that in some way, it's really broad level of success answer, but yeah, for me that's what I would like to achieve. If anyone else wants to add anything else.
For me, this piece of work really kind of adds to the growing body of work of kind of connecting climate change all the way through down to various kinds of impacts. And I think historically, just because of the sheer size and complexity of these problems, people slice off little bits and look at them, and there's more and more work coming out taking a broader systems approach. But really, in my view, this is sort of the way of the future, is that we need to be thinking about things holistically and looking at how the system interconnects and really thinking about all the flow-on consequences. And as Nikki says, that's not easy at all, but I think a project like this, and this project specifically, kind of pushes us down that path a little bit further.
Yeah, one other thing I'll just add to that is I think as system scientists, we've how do I say this politely? We felt a little bit threatened in recent years because there's been so much focus on other methods, but I think there's still a place for systems thinking, system competency, and I would hope this sort of is a bit of like, sort of like a renaissance of systems thinking.
A reminder of its usefulness.
Yeah.
Anything people would like to add to that question or respond to that question?
Well, now I'm interested in the ways it's been under threat.
It's not. It's just more that things that are flashy and AI, they might be easier to fund. New things. New things are easier to say have significant science advancement.
I feel I'm going
to. I'm probably going too far, but yeah.
No, that's always interesting to hear. But I did have a clarification, which In the hydrological information where you sort of zoomed, there was that, I guess, added detail, and included the Bayesian networks as well. Did some parts of those include climate modeling, or across the board sort of different climate change scenarios, sorry, or not? I wasn't sure, and I would like to know that.
So we didn't run the groundwater modeling under different climate scenarios. The way it was set up was under those 3 scenarios, as Nikki described, with a base condition, which was sort of representative of mean conditions, and then a wet and a dry scenario. But then what we did is we combined that with historical precipitation data and projections for how precipitation is likely to change into the future. And so then we could relate those wet and dry scenarios to how likely they would be in the future. And so that's how we could patch together these kind of general scenarios that we did with future projections. Ideally, you would run, infinite number of different combinations of scenarios, but I mean, realistically, these numerical models are really intensive to run. And so you need to be choosy in the way you set them up. And then we have that ability through a technique like the Bayesian network models to combine it then with other pieces of data to then create that end-to-end pipeline from climate change scenario all the way through to the groundwater modeling.
Thank you. If there one last call for any comments or questions, can be from our researchers or from attendees. Otherwise, I will just, huge congratulations to the very big team for the piece of work that you've put together, and wonderful to have it done by Christmas. You can tick that off your to-do list for 2023, and return refreshed, think, for new projects in 2024. Nikki and Christina, would you like to add anything? Otherwise, thank you again, and I'll close with the karakia finally.
Can I just add one thing too? Sorry, because she's not on the list of people you can see, but a big thank you to Stefania too, who did a lot of the work bringing it together.
Yes. Stefania is here but did not raise her hand, not switched her over, but thank you. And I think in general, just you had a huge team working on it, right? So big mihi. Okay, our blessing to end. Te mori o te hui, kaya. Te mori o te wānanga, kaya. Koia ki runga, koia ki raro. Hume, huie, taiki.